The millionaire was left paralyzed upon seeing his beloved missing for 7 years, begging on the streets with twins. He approached, and what he discovered left him speechless. The city lights shimmered like jewels on the horizon, reflecting off the dark windows of the luxurious car that glided smoothly through the streets. Robert was distracted, his eyes fixed on the emptiness beyond the window. The gala event he had just left was another reminder of his loneliness. Surrounded by influential people, polite conversations, and glasses of champagne, he felt even more distant from something that truly mattered. Mary. The name still echoed in his mind like a sad, constant melody, even after 7 years since her disappearance. The pain of her absence had never lessened. He had searched, hired investigators, scoured every clue, but nothing. It was as if Mary had evaporated. Each silent night in his mansion, the void seemed larger. That night, driven by a feeling he couldn't even explain, Robert asked the driver to take a different route home. As the car entered a less lit street, a completely different scene unfolded before him. The glamorous storefronts gave way to peeling walls and dirty alleys. It was a reality Robert rarely faced, wrapped in his bubble of wealth and power. Suddenly, something caught his attention. On the sidewalk, under the flickering light of a street lamp, a female figure held a plastic cup and gestured slowly to passers-by. Next to her, 2 children, twins, huddled against the cold of the night. Robert felt an inexplicable chill. He asked the driver to stop the car. Stepping out of the vehicle was like time stood still. He immediately recognized those features, even hidden beneath exhaustion and misery. Mary. Robert's heart raced, disbelief mixing with an overwhelming wave of emotions. She was thin, downtrodden, wearing clothes that barely protected her body from the cold. Her eyes, once so bright, were dull, but still carried a depth he would never forget. "Mary," he almost whispered, but the tone of his voice made her freeze in place. Her eyes slowly turned to him, wide with shock. For a moment, the world seemed to spin slower. Robert noticed how she held the children's hands instinctively, as if she wanted to protect them. The boys looked at him with curiosity and fear, their identical features marking a strange familiarity Robert couldn't ignore. "Robert," Mary finally murmured, her voice weak and hesitant. He took a step forward, feeling a lump form in his throat. Part of him wanted to embrace her, part wanted to demand answers. But in that moment, all he could feel was immense compassion for the fragile figure before him. "My God, what happened to you?" he asked, trying to control the urgency in his voice. "Mary, you can't stay here. Please, come with me." Mary stepped back slightly, squeezing the boy's hands. Her look was one of distrust and fear. Robert realized she was hesitant, perhaps scared by his sudden appearance. He took a deep breath, trying to soften his tone. "I just want to help. You don't need to stay here. I can take you to a safe place, for you and them." He looked at the boys, who were now watching him with childlike curiosity. "I can't," Mary began, but her voice faltered. I can't, Robert." "Can't?" "Mary, look at you, please. Just for one night to rest. Then you decide what to do. I won't force you to anything." She hesitated, looking at her children. There was a conflict in her eyes, as if she was weighing her options. Finally, she exhaled a long, reluctant sigh, nodding her head. "Okay, just for one night." Robert felt a mix of relief and anguish. He reached out his hand to help her up, but Mary ignored it, standing up with difficulty on her own. The boys followed him with timid steps to the car. As they settled in the back seat, a detail caught Robert's attention. One of the twins, Peter, tugged at his coat to adjust it, and something became visible on his skin, a small birthmark near his neck. A flash of memory hit him. It was exactly the same as Robert's, a trait he knew was hereditary. He looked at the other boy, Michel, and noticed the same mark. His heart raced. Questions began to form in his mind, but he knew this wasn't the time for confrontations. For now, he needed to ensure Mary and the children were safe. The car headed to the apartment Robert had prepared for emergencies. As they traveled through the silence of the night, a new spark of hope began to kindle within him, along with a troubling suspicion that could change everything. The early hours of the morning were already advancing when the car parked in front of a discreet yet sophisticated building in a quiet neighborhood of the city. Robert had chosen that apartment as an emergency. He would one day use it to shelter Mary and 2 children. The doorman, visibly confused to see the millionaire accompanied by a woman and 2 ragged boys, was quickly dismissed with a short wave from Robert. As soon as they entered the apartment, Mary seemed even more uncomfortable. Her eyes scanned the impeccably decorated space, but her body remained tense, unsure whether to trust. The twins, on the other hand, did not hide their fascination. It was the first time they had seen something so luxurious. Peter and Michelle ran to the large leather sofa while Mary reprimanded them in a low voice. "Everything is fine, Mary," Robert said, trying to calm the atmosphere. "This place is now yours, at least until we decide the next step." "I said I would only stay 1 night," she replied sharply. Robert sighed, but did not insist. Instead, he grabbed a phone and made a few quick calls, arranging for clothes and food to be delivered immediately. He knew that with Mary it was better to act cautiously. Pressuring her could push her away again, and he was not willing to take that risk. While she arranged for the boys to sleep in one of the bedrooms, Robert remained in the living room, thoughtful. His mind was spinning around what had happened in the past few years. The Mary he knew was strong and fearless, but now she seemed like a cornered animal. And those children, the idea that they could be his children, unsettled him. The birthmark was more than a coincidence. When Mary returned to the living room, her face less tense, Robert decided to try a dialogue. "Mary, I know you don't want to talk about the past, but I need to understand what happened. Why did you leave that way?" He kept his voice low, almost pleading. She shook her head, averting her gaze. "I can't, Robert. It's dangerous. All I can say is that I had no choice." "Dangerous?" He frowned, intrigued. "What are you talking about? You know I would have done anything to protect you." Mary stared at him, and for the first time he saw tears shining in her eyes. But before she could respond, she murmured, "Please, don't ask me anything else. I can't. Not now." Robert felt a mix of frustration and compassion. He wanted to embrace her, but respected the boundary she had set. However, he knew he wouldn't be able to rest until he uncovered the truth. In the following days, Robert began to act discreetly. Using his influence, he contacted old acquaintances who might have information about Mary from that time. He visited places she used to frequent and reviewed records from detectives he had hired years before. Gradually, a pattern began to emerge. There were signs that someone had been following her before she disappeared. People mentioned seeing a mysterious man frequently in the vicinity, but no one knew exactly who he was. Meanwhile, Robert watched Peter and Michelle. The boys were more comfortable in the apartment and, without realizing it, began to drop small details that further piqued his curiosity. In a conversation between them, while playing with the new toys Robert had bought, Michelle said, "Mom always said our dad was strong and had eyes like ours." The comment made Robert's heart race. He realized he couldn't ignore the signs. But how to confront Mary without scaring her? That night, after the boys had gone to sleep, Robert tried once again to talk to Mary. He found her sitting on the sofa, looking out the window as if she were in another world. "Mary, I need to know one thing," he said, approaching carefully. "These boys, are they my children?" Mary was paralyzed. Her breathing became heavy, and she clenched her hands, clearly trying to control her emotions. But once again, she avoided answering directly. "Robert, please don't make this harder than it already is. Just let me take care of them." "I want to help, Mary, and I won't give up until I uncover the whole truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert knew that the shadows of the past Mary carried were deeper than he could imagine, but he also knew that regardless of the answers, he was determined to protect her and her children, whatever the cost. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog. In the days that followed, the silence between Robert and Mary had become almost unbearable. He respected her reluctance to speak, but his determination to uncover the truth grew with each passing moment. She, on the other hand, struggled against a weight that consumed her, as if carrying the secret for so long had left irreparable marks. That night, while the boys slept soundly, Mary finally called Robert to talk. She was sitting on the living room sofa, hands clasped and her gaze lost. Seeing her in that position sent a chill down Robert's spine. Something important was about to be revealed. "I'm going to tell you everything," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to promise me something." "Anything you want," he replied, sitting down in the armchair opposite her. "I just want to know the truth." She took a deep breath, trying to gather her strength. Her eyes met Robert's, filled with pain and shame. 7 years ago, when I disappeared, it wasn't because I wanted to. I was forced." Robert leaned forward, his fists clenched in anticipation. "Forced? By whom?" "Christian." The name left her mouth like poison, laden with resentment. "Your uncle. He threatened me, Robert. He said that if I didn't leave you, he would kill me, and he would kill you too." The revelation hit Robert like a blow. He stood still, trying to process what he had just heard. Christian, his own uncle, whom he had always considered a calculating but loyal family man, now he was accused of something so heinous. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured, confused. "Why would he do that? What would be his motive?" "He thought I was a threat." Mary averted her gaze, her voice taking on a bitter tone. "He said I was distracting you from the business, that you were becoming vulnerable. But it wasn't just him, Robert. He didn't do it alone." Robert felt his stomach churn. He knew what was coming next, but his mind refused to accept it. "My mother?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. Mary nodded slowly, and tears finally began to stream down her face. "Olga never liked me. She always made it clear she thought I wasn't good enough for you. When she found out we were talking about marriage, she teamed up with Christian. They decided to keep me away anyway." Robert leaned back in his chair, feeling the crushing weight of betrayal. He ran his hands over his face, trying to control the avalanche of emotions overwhelming him. Anger, sadness, guilt. How had he not noticed? How had he not seen the manipulations of people so close to him? "And why didn't you tell me anything?" he asked, his voice choking. "Why did you just run away?" Mary squeezed her hands, the knuckles turning white. "I was scared. Christian was a dangerous man. He showed me he was willing to do anything, and I couldn't risk your life or our children's lives." Robert widened his eyes, the words echoing in his mind. "Our children?" he repeated, as if needing confirmation. Mary nodded again, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I found out I was pregnant shortly before I ran away. I couldn't tell you. If Christian knew, he would have used it against us. I fled to protect the boys, to protect you." The confession brought a wave of uncontrollable emotions. Robert stood abruptly, pacing back and forth as if trying to process everything. He thought of the years he had lost, the moments he never lived with Peter and Michelle, and felt a deep pain. "I lost everything because of them," he said, finally stopping his pacing. "They stole 7 years of my life, Mary. 7 years." She looked up at him, her expression filled with guilt and sadness. "And I lost you, Robert. Do you think it was easy? I had to start from scratch, alone, with no one. Every day was a struggle to survive, but I did it for the boys. For us. Her words cut Robert like a blade. He knew she was right, that her actions had been driven by fear and love. But the pain of betrayal and loss still weighed heavily on him like an unbearable burden. "They will pay for this," he declared, his voice firm. "Christian, my mother, they will pay." Mary looked at him with concern. "Robert, don't do anything rash. They are dangerous." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he replied, his eyes shining with determination. "But now they will have to deal with me." Silence filled the room. Mary looked exhausted, but relieved to have finally told the truth. Robert, on the other hand, felt as though he was only beginning a battle that would change their lives forever. Whatever came next, he knew he would do everything to protect Mary, Peter, and Michelle, his family. It was time to confront the past and bring justice to the present. The morning sun streamed through the large apartment windows, but Robert couldn't feel the warmth. He was sitting in his makeshift office, analyzing stacks of documents he had managed to gather over the past few weeks. His most reliable contacts had worked quickly. Among bank statements, transaction records, and encrypted messages, a disturbing truth was beginning to emerge. Christian and Olga were more involved in Mary's disappearance than he could have imagined. Among the papers, Robert found bank transfers made from an account linked to the company to a private investigation firm that had apparently been following Mary months before her disappearance. There was also an email sent by Christian to his mother, describing Mary as a dangerous distraction that needs to be eliminated. Despite the contained language, the threatening tone was clear. Robert felt his stomach churn as he read those words. The mother he had revered and the uncle who had helped guide him in business had betrayed his trust in an unforgivable way. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Peter and Michelle were more comfortable. The boys, with their typical curiosity, began to explore every corner of the place, discovering each detail that luxury could offer. For Robert, watching them run around the space was a mix of joy and pain. They were his children, but they didn't know it. He observed every small gesture, the way Peter furrowed his brow when concentrating so much like him, and how Michel talked with his hands, reminding him of Mary. One morning, while they were playing with a set of building blocks Robert had bought, Peter looked at him and asked, "Uncle Robert, why are you taking care of us?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at the boy and then at Michelle, who awaited the answer with equal curiosity. Robert tried to smile, but felt the weight of the truth in his chest. "Because I want you and your mother to be okay. You are important to me." The two boys accepted the answer with childlike simplicity, but Robert knew that moment couldn't last forever. He needed to tell the truth, but the fear of how it would affect the boys made him hesitant. At night, while Mary was putting the boys to sleep, Robert took the opportunity to continue his investigations. He had hired a hacker to recover deleted messages from Christian's emails, and what he found made him even angrier. There were records of Christian coordinating with others to monitor Mary's movements after she fled. He seemed determined to ensure she wouldn't return to Robert or reveal the twins' secret. Robert also found messages from his mother. She not only supported Christian's plan, but seemed to agree with the ruthless methods. In one part of a message, she wrote, "He needs to stay focused, and Mary is a distraction that could destroy everything we've worked for." Those words echoed in Robert's mind. Everything they had worked for, and him, his happiness, his dreams, didn't matter at all. The next morning, while having breakfast, Robert tried to approach the boys more directly. He helped Michelle cut the fruit and praised Peter for assembling a complicated toy. The two began to open up more, sharing stories about small moments from their lives with Mary. Robert absorbed every word, trying to fill in the years he had lost. At one point, Michelle said something that broke his heart. "Mom always says our dad is away, but that he loves us." Robert had to summon all his self-control to avoid crying in front of the boys. He looked at Mary, who had frozen upon hearing the comment. Their eyes met, and she knew he was on the verge of telling the truth. After the boys ran off to play, Robert approached Mary. "I need to tell them, Mary. They deserve to know." She shook her head, worried. "They're still very young. I don't know how they would react. Besides, all of this is still so recent, Robert. They need stability before anything else." "Stability?" Robert replied, his voice firmer. "They need to know they have a father. I can't keep pretending." Mary sighed deeply, running her hands through her hair. "Just wait a little longer. Let them get used to you. They will understand in time." Robert knew Mary was right, but that didn't make the wait any less painful. He stayed up all night, reflecting on what the future would hold for Peter and Michael. He wanted to protect them, but he also knew that the truth was a burden that sooner or later they would all have to bear. Deep down, Robert felt that telling the boys the truth was only the beginning. The real challenge would be facing Christian and Olga, and ensuring that nothing would ever threaten his family again. The clock struck midnight when Robert closed the last folder of documents, a robust compendium of evidence he knew was indisputable. The messages, bank records, and testimonies from former employees were sufficient to unmask Christian and expose his mother as an accomplice. In that moment, there was no more room for hesitation. He was no longer the inexperienced young man his family members thought was being manipulated. He was ready to confront those responsible for destroying his life. The next morning, Robert drove to the main office of the family company, where he knew he would find Christian. The environment, luxurious and oppressive, seemed to reflect his uncle's arrogance. Christian, seated in a leather chair, didn't bother to hide his surprise upon seeing Robert enter unannounced. "Robert, what an honor," he said with a calculated smile. "I thought you were busy taking care of your new projects." Robert closed the door behind him, maintaining a cold gaze. "We have a lot to discuss, Christian." Christian leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms with a look of disdain. "If it's about the company, I've already said everything is under control. You can relax." "No, it's not about the company," Robert replied, placing a heavy envelope on his uncle's desk. "It's about Mary." Christian's smile vanished instantly. He opened the envelope, flipping through the documents, and his face hardened. Exchanged messages with Olga, transfers to the agency that followed Mary, and details of his attempts to intimidate her. The evidence was overwhelming. "What do you want with this?" Christian asked, trying to sound unshaken, but the tension in his voice was evident. "I want you to admit everything. Tell me what you did and why." Robert's voice was firm, almost threatening. Christian snorted, but his expression revealed growing concern. "I was protecting you, Robert. Protecting your career, your future." Mary was a distraction. She had nothing to offer but complications. "I did what I thought was best for the greater good." Robert took a step forward, slamming his hands on the table. "For your greater good, Christian. You destroyed my life. You took me away from the woman I loved, from my own children." His voice rose, filled with indignation. "You stole 7 years of my life, and now you try to justify it as if it were an act of generosity?" Christian tried to maintain his composure, but the weight of the evidence and Robert's relentless tone made him falter. "And what are you going to do with this?" he asked, his challenging tone masking his fear. "I have everything I need to destroy you," Robert responded. "I can expose your actions to the company, the police, the media. You will lose everything, Christian, or you can do as I say." The silence that followed was deafening. Christian knew he had no way out. Robert left him with a choice: resign from the company and disappear from their lives forever, or face public humiliation. With no alternatives, Christian agreed to sign his own removal order. As Robert left the office, he felt a mix of relief and anger. This was only the first battle. Later that day, Robert went to his mother's mansion. The environment, always impeccable, now felt empty, almost oppressive. Olga was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine when he entered. The smile she gave upon seeing him quickly disappeared when she noticed the seriousness of his demeanor. "Robert, what happened?" she asked, trying to sound carefree. "You know very well what happened, Mother." He left a similar envelope to the one he handed to Christian on the coffee table. "Read." Olga hesitated but opened the envelope. As she read, the color drained from her face. When she finished, she set the papers aside with trembling hands. "This is absurd," she began, but Robert interrupted her. "Don't deny it. I have enough proof to know that you supported Christian, that you agreed to destroy what I had with Mary. You betrayed me." Olga stood up, trying to regain control of the conversation. "I did this for you, Robert. You were blinded by her. That woman wasn't right for you. I thought I was protecting your future, your legacy." "My future?" Robert's voice was filled with hurt. "You destroyed my present, Mother. You took me away from the woman I loved, from my children. You knew she was pregnant, didn't you?" Olga bowed her head, unable to respond. The silence was a sufficient answer. "You had no right," Robert continued, now calmer but still firm. "You took everything from me. For years I lived tormented, not knowing what happened to Mary. And now I discover that you were the one pulling the strings behind everything." Tears began to stream down Olga's face. "I was wrong, Robert. I was terribly wrong. But I did it because I love you. Don't you see? I only wanted the best for you." Robert shook his head, frustrated. "The best for me? No. You wanted what you thought was best for yourself. But it's over now, Mother. I will take care of my family. My real family. And I will ensure that neither you, nor Christian, nor anyone else interferes." Olga sobbed, trying to compose herself. "Please forgive me, Robert. I want to make things right. Forgiveness is not something you ask for. It's something you earn." He stared at her, his eyes filled with sadness. "Maybe one day I can forgive you. But that depends on your actions from now on." Olga nodded, unable to say anything more. Robert left the mansion without looking back, his heart heavy but determined. He knew there was still much to rebuild, but for the first time in years, he felt in control of his destiny. Now, with Christian out of the way and his mother confronted with the reality of her actions, Robert was ready to start a new life, with Mary, Peter, and Michelle, a life where no one else could destroy them. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the breakfast table in Robert's apartment, now transformed into a home for Mary and the twins. The atmosphere there was light, though it still carried remnants of a past everyone was trying to leave behind. Peter and Michelle, with their characteristic childlike energy, laughed loudly as they fought over the last piece of cake. Robert, sitting at the head of the table, watched the scene with a discreet but emotion-filled smile. "Peter, let Michelle have it. You ate 2 pieces." Mary scolded, but without hiding the tenderness in her voice. "It's fair. He won the game yesterday," Robert said, winking at Michelle, who laughed, feeling supported. Family moments were new to him. For years, Robert had dedicated himself solely to work, filling the void with goals and material achievements. Now, however, he was learning the importance of small gestures, teaching Peter how to fix a broken toy, helping Michelle with homework, or simply listening to the endless stories the two invented. Every moment with the boys felt like a gift, a fragment of the years he had lost. Mary, for her part, was still struggling with the ghosts of the past. Although she was relieved to finally be safe alongside Robert, the fear that something might separate them again was constant. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, tormented by nightmares. In those moments, she found unwavering support in Robert. He would listen, hold her hands, and remind her that they were together now and nothing would change that. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Mary," he said one night as they sat on the balcony watching the illuminated city. "I'm here, and I always will be." Mary looked at him, tears threatening to fall. For so long she had learned not to trust anyone, to be solely responsible for protecting the boys. But gradually, Robert's love and dedication were rebuilding something she thought she had lost forever: trust. At the same time, Olga was beginning to show signs of change. The confrontation with Robert had been devastating for her, but also a turning point. For the first time in years, she found herself facing the consequences of her actions and realized how much she had lost. She started with small gestures, sending toys to the boys, accompanied by handwritten cards. It wasn't well received immediately. Mary still held much distrust, and Robert was attentive to any attempts at manipulation. But Olga persisted. She made it a point to seek a therapist, and gradually began to show Robert that her change was genuine. One afternoon, Olga asked to meet with Mary. It was a tense meeting marked by long silences and hesitations. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Olga began, nervously holding a cup of tea. But I want you to know that I regret everything. I just wanted to protect my son, but I ended up destroying the most important thing for him." Mary maintained a firm posture, but something in Olga's eyes seemed sincere. "It's not just about me," Mary replied, her voice calm but resolute. "It's about the boys. They don't know what happened, but one day they will. And I need to ensure that, when that happens, they see that you have changed." Olga nodded, tears in her eyes. It was only the beginning of a long and uncertain path, but she was willing to walk it. Meanwhile, Robert and Mary worked together to overcome the traumas of the past. They decided to seek professional help, both for themselves and to strengthen their bond with the twins. Therapy brought deep wounds to the surface, but also allowed them to see the resilience they had built together. One of the most memorable moments was when Robert finally told Peter and Michael the truth. He gathered the boys on the sofa and explained in simple words that he was their father. The silence that followed was almost unbearable until Michel, with his big, bright eyes, asked, "So, you're always going to be here with us?" "Always," Robert replied, emotional. "You are the most important thing in my life." The boys hugged him tightly, and Peter whispered, "We already knew." The declaration brought laughter and tears from Robert and Mary. It was the beginning of a new phase, full of challenges, but also of promises. With Christian out of the company, Robert began to transform the business, removing corrupt practices and implementing more ethical management. He knew this change would be slow and face resistance, but he was determined to honor his values. Meanwhile, the relationship with Olga continued to evolve. Although Robert still maintained a protective barrier, he began to include her in important family moments, allowing the boys to know her as their grandmother. The rebuilding process was not easy, but Robert, Mary, Peter, and Michel were finally together, overcoming the past and embracing the future. More than ever, they knew they had found something invaluable: a second chance. The gentle sound of a piano filled the air as candles delicately illuminated the small chapel. The space, adorned with white flowers and touches of green, exuded simplicity and elegance. It was exactly what Robert and Mary had desired, an intimate ceremony surrounded only by the people who truly mattered. That moment was not just the union of two people, but the celebration of a rebuilt family and a promising future. Peter and Michel, dressed in tiny suits that made them look like miniature versions of Robert, watched everything with curious and excited eyes. For them, that day was already special, but they had no idea how much it would mean. The path to that moment had not been easy. In the months leading up to the ceremony, Robert and Mary worked tirelessly to solidify the love that bound them. He learned to be the partner Mary needed, someone who not only protected her, but walked beside her. Mary, in turn, allowed herself to trust and dream again. They knew that marriage was not just a ritual, but a symbol of everything they had overcome together. Olga had also come a long way. Although she still faced Robert's distrust, her actions spoke louder than her words. She dedicated herself to earning Mary's respect, showing up without overstepping boundaries. Her relationship with the grandchildren blossomed, especially when she told old family stories or cooked their favorite dishes. Gradually, Robert began to let his guard down, allowing Olga to reconnect. At the altar, Robert waited, his hands firmly clasped, but his eyes shining with emotion. When Mary entered, accompanied by Peter and Michelle, it seemed as if the world had stopped. Dressed in a simple yet elegant white dress, she was the vision of everything he loved most: strength, beauty, and resilience. The boys held her hands like little guardians as they walked down the aisle. As she took her place beside Robert, Mary felt her heart race. This was the realization of a dream she thought was lost forever. "You look beautiful," he whispered. She smiled, her eyes glistening but full of joy. The most emotional moment of the ceremony came when, in front of everyone, Robert paused during his vows. He turned to Peter and Michelle, who were sitting nearby, and called them to the altar. Confused but curious, the boys approached. "I want you to know something very important," he began, kneeling to be at their level. "Today is not just the day I marry the woman I love. It is the day I publicly acknowledge that you are my children." The silence in the chapel was filled with emotional sighs and a few tears among the guests. Peter and Michelle exchanged glances, their expressions mixing surprise and happiness. "So, you're our real dad?" Michelle asked with a shy smile. "I always was," Robert replied, his voice choked with emotion. "And I always will be." The boys hugged him tightly as the audience applauded amidst tears. Mary at the altar couldn't contain her emotion. It was the perfect closure to everything they had been through. The celebration was simple, but full of meaning. After the ceremony, the guests, a select group of friends and family, gathered in a garden beside the chapel. Peter and Michelle played among the tables, while Olga, for the first time in years, seemed truly integrated into the family. She conversed with Mary, praising the ceremony and the vows, and there was something genuine in her voice. "Thank you for letting me be here," Olga said, holding Mary's hand for a moment. "I know I still have much to prove, but I want you to know I'm trying." Mary smiled, still cautious but open to progress. "You're showing that trust is possible, Olga, and that already means a lot." In the middle of the party, Robert gave a brief speech, thanking everyone for being there. He spoke about love, resilience, and the strength of a family that not only survived adversities but was reborn from them. "Today, as I look at Mary, Peter, and Michelle, I see everything I never knew I needed. You are my life, and nothing will change that." The applause filled the air, but it was Mary's look, full of love and gratitude, that truly mattered to him. With Christian finally out of the company, Robert had implemented a new era of transparency and ethics in the business. He knew that the legacy he would leave for his children needed to reflect the values that now guided his life. Alongside Mary, Peter, and Michelle, he felt he was building something truly meaningful. As the sun set, the family gathered in the center of the garden. Peter and Michelle ran around their parents, laughing and playing. Robert held Mary's hand, and the two exchanged a smile that needed no words. They had faced the darkness, but now, finally, they were living in the light. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a new start, full of hope, love, and endless possibilities. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.